My son came back from summer camp a week early. During dinner, I noticed he was eating with his right hand, even though he had always been left-handed. And then suddenly, the phone rang. It was my son calling. But he was sitting right across from me, and his phone was lying on the table. That day, it was raining. Heavy drops drummed on the roof, filling our home with a cozy sound. I was sitting in the living room with a cup of hot tea when I heard the front door open. Strange. My husband wasn't supposed to be back for another 3 hours, and Michael, my 13-year-old son, was supposed to stay at Pine Grove summer camp for another week. "Mom, I'm home," came a familiar voice from the hallway. I nearly dropped my cup. Setting it down on the table, I hurried to the corridor. "Michael, what happened? Why aren't you at camp?" My son was standing in the hallway, soaked to the skin, a backpack slung over his shoulder. He looked exactly the same as 3 weeks ago, when my husband and I dropped him off at camp. The same chestnut hair, the same brown eyes, but there was something different in his gaze. I just couldn't stay there any longer. I missed home. He shrugged and looked down. "Did someone bully you?" I stepped closer, searching his face. "No, nothing like that. I just wanted to come home." Something didn't add up. Michael had never been a homebody. Ever since childhood, he had been eager to go outside, to his friends, on hikes, on excursions. He was always bored at home. He had begged us to send him to that camp, promising it would be the coolest summer of his life. "Are you sure everything's all right?" "Maybe I should call the camp director," I suggested, but Michael shook his head sharply. "No, Mom. It's fine. I already said goodbye to everyone. The counselors know I left." "How did you get here?" "By bus," he answered quickly. "Can I go change?" "I'm soaked." I nodded, still uneasy, but decided not to press him. Maybe he was just tired, and tomorrow he'd explain why he came back early. But something inside me whispered, something had happened to my son, and it was more serious than simple homesickness. In the following days, my unease only grew stronger. Michael's behavior changed. At first, the differences were barely noticeable, so subtle I almost convinced myself I was imagining things. But with each passing day, the strangeness grew. First, I noticed a change in his appetite. Michael had always been picky about food ever since he was little. At 6, he declared war on green vegetables. He especially hated broccoli, and not even doctors could persuade him of its health benefits. Robert and I tried everything, hiding vegetables and sauces, making funny edible pictures on his plate, promising extra computer time. Nothing worked. If Michael found even a single piece of broccoli in his food, he could throw a full-on drama or sit at the table for hours refusing to eat. That's why I almost dropped the tray when, on the 3rd day after his return from camp, Michael not only calmly ate the vegetable side dish with his meat, but even asked for seconds, of broccoli in particular. "Are you sick?" I joked, giving him another serving. He flinched slightly, then forced a smile. "No, it's just..." At camp, there was a really strict counselor. Made us finish everything. I got used to it. The explanation sounded plausible, but something about it bothered me. Michael spoke of this strict counselor without his usual drama or outrage, as if he were retelling someone else's story. Second, his room. Michael had always been a messy teenager. Robert once joked that a grenade made of socks and t-shirts had gone off in there. Getting Michael to clean was a real feat, requiring long negotiations, threats, and promises of rewards. Even when he finally did tidy up, the result was poor. Clothes just moved from one pile to another. On the 4th day after his return, I went into his room to collect dirty laundry and froze in the doorway. The room was spotless. The bed was perfectly made, not just with the blanket tossed over, but with neatly tucked-in corners like in a hotel. Clothes hung in the closet, sorted by color. Books on the shelf stood in strict alphabetical order. Even his collection of superhero figurines, usually scattered everywhere, was now lined up in perfect order. from the smallest to the largest. "Michael," I asked when he came back from school, "did you clean your room yourself?" He hesitated for a split second. "Yes, I decided to be more organized." "That's impressive," I said, unsure whether to be pleased or worried. "But why all of a sudden?" "At camp we had daily cleanliness checks," he replied, avoiding my eyes. "I realized order saves time. You don't have to look for things." There was logic in that, but I couldn't shake the feeling I was talking to a stranger. Michael had never cared about saving time, and he certainly never thought neatness was the way to do it. Third, his musical tastes and hobbies changed. Since he was 12, Michael had been obsessed with rock music. His room was covered with posters of Arctic Monkeys, the Black Keys, and 21 Pilots. He was saving up for an electric guitar and had even started a band with his friends, Atomic Waste, where he was the lead singer. Robert took him to concerts while I plugged my ears when they held rehearsals in the garage. Now, though, from his room came the sound of Chopin's piano sonatas and Mozart's symphonies. The posters were still on the walls, but it seemed like Michael no longer even noticed them. When I asked him about this strange change in his musical preferences, he looked embarrassed and said he had discovered a new genre at camp. "We had a music club," he explained. "Our teacher believed classical music helps with concentration." "And what about your band?" I asked. "You had plans to perform at school this fall." Michael's face darkened. "I don't know. Maybe that was all just stupid. That music, it's..." He hesitated, searching for words. "Kind of childish." Childish? Michael had been ready to fight anyone who dared criticize his music taste. He could spend hours discussing the depth of lyrics and the complexity of modern rock compositions. And suddenly, childish? Along with his musical changes came other strange shifts in his hobbies. Michael abandoned his skateboard, even though he used to ride it at every opportunity. He stopped playing video games. His PlayStation was gathering dust, though before camp he would spend all his free time in front of the screen. Instead, I would find him reading serious history books, biographies of famous people, even poetry, things that had always bored and irritated him before. One evening, I found him in the backyard, sitting on a bench, gazing at the starry sky with fascination. "Enjoying the stars?" I asked, sitting down beside him. "Yes," he replied softly. "They're so infinite." "I never noticed you were interested in astronomy," I said carefully. He flinched, as if caught doing something forbidden. "It's just, at camp we had night excursions. They told us about the constellations." At camp? That was the phrase he used to explain all the strange changes, as if those 3 weeks had completely rewritten his personality. But the strangest, the most inexplicable change was that Michael had started writing with his right hand. My son had always been left-handed since early childhood. I remembered how, in kindergarten, a teacher had tried to retrain him, forcing a pencil into his right hand, a common but outdated practice. Robert and I had a serious talk with the administration back then and insisted Michael be allowed to develop naturally. And now I caught him doing homework, carefully writing in his notebook with his right hand. The handwriting looked shaky, the letters uneven. But he stubbornly continued, biting his lower lip in concentration. "Michael, what are you doing?" I asked, unable to hide my surprise. "Why are you writing with your right hand?" He jerked and looked at me with the guilty expression of someone caught doing something indecent. At camp, there was a calligraphy club. They taught us to write with our right hand, to develop the brain," he stammered. "It's good for neuroplasticity." I stared at him. "You're uncomfortable. You've never written with your right hand before." "It's just practice, Mom," he replied irritably. "I'll get used to it." "But why? You write perfectly with your left." He set the pen down and looked at me with something close to despair in his eyes. It's easier to be right-handed in a right-handed world, you know? Some things are hard to do left-handed. Scissors, for example. Or, well, lots of stuff. I was stunned. Michael had never once complained about difficulties with being left-handed. On the contrary, he had been proud of it, liked to mention famous left-handers, from Leonardo da Vinci to Kurt Cobain. I pretended to accept his explanation, but inside, fear coiled tight. Something was profoundly wrong with my son. Either something so traumatic had happened that it completely reshaped his personality, or number. I couldn't even allow myself to think of the alternative. That would be too absurd, too much like the plot of a cheap thriller. The changes went beyond habits and hobbies, even his way of speaking, his relationships with friends. Everything had shifted. Michael had always been the life of the party, outgoing, loud, often cheeky. Our house had always been full of his friends. They played video games, rehearsed with the band, had movie marathons. Michael's phone buzzed constantly with messenger notifications, and his social media pages overflowed with photos and comments. Now he had turned into a quiet, withdrawn teenager. He didn't invite friends over, gave one-word replies to their messages, made excuses to avoid meeting up. When his best friend Jason showed up unannounced to drag Michael to the skate park, I witnessed a strange scene. "Bro, where have you been?" Jason stood in the hallway, twisting his helmet in his hands. "We thought you were still at camp. Then Chris saw you in the store, but you acted like you didn't see him. What's going on?" "Sorry," Michael said quietly. "I just have a lot going on." "Then tell me." Jason clapped him on the shoulder, and I saw Michael flinch at that simple, friendly gesture. "That's what friends are for. Come on, let's skate like the old days." "I can't." Michael stepped back. "I've got a lot of summer homework." Jason stared at him as if at an alien. "Homework? You? Seriously?" "Yeah, I fell behind a bit. Sorry." When Jason left, I saw him standing in our driveway staring at the house in total confusion. What worried me most of all, though, was the change in Michael's relationship with his little sister, Sophie. They had always been very close, despite the 6-year age gap. Michael adored Sophie. He protected her, played with her, helped with her homework. She thought he was the best brother in the world and bragged about him to her friends constantly. Now he seemed to avoid his sister. He wouldn't answer her questions, slipped away to his room when she tried to show him her drawings or tell him about school. Sophie was confused and hurt. One evening, I heard crying from the children's room. Sophie was sitting on her bed, hugging the teddy bear Michael had once given her. "Sweetheart, what happened?" I sat down beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Michael doesn't love me anymore," she sobbed. "He won't read me bedtime stories like he used to. He doesn't play with me, and he doesn't call me Sof. Sof. That's what Michael had called his sister ever since she first learned to walk. "Maybe he's just tired," I tried to comfort her, though I didn't believe it myself. "You know, he's older now. He has his own things to worry about." "No." Sophie shook her head stubbornly. "He's changed." I showed him my new drawing, and he didn't even look at it. The real Michael always said I was the best artist. The real Michael. At those words, a chill ran down my spine. Even an 8-year-old could sense something was wrong with her brother. That same night, after Sophie had fallen asleep, I stood in the hallway outside Michael's room. From behind the door came muffled sounds. I gently pushed it open and saw my son sitting on his bed, his head in his hands, silently crying. His shoulders shook and his fingers clutched his hair. I walked in quietly, sat beside him, and asked what was wrong, how I could help. But Michael said nothing. No matter how I tried to comfort him, I couldn't. The next day, I shared my observations with my husband. "Rob, something's wrong with Michael," I spoke in a low voice, though we were in our bedroom with the door closed. "He's changed. Completely. In every way. I listed all the oddities I'd noticed, from his eating and music to his right hand and his relationships with his friends and sister. "And you heard Sophie crying today, didn't you?" she said. "The real Michael, always." I trailed off, unable to speak aloud my darkest suspicion. Robert rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Emma, you're exaggerating," he said, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. "Kids grow up. They change. That's normal. But so suddenly? In just 3 weeks at camp?" I shook my head. "And it's not just his habits. He's different, more withdrawn, sad. I heard him crying last night, and the way he looks at me, as if he's afraid of something. Maybe it's a girl problem," Robert suggested, "or a fight with his friends. Or maybe he was bullied at camp. Give him time. He'll tell us when he's ready." My husband was always more rational than me. He preferred simple, logical explanations, and usually he was right. "Maybe," I nodded, though I wasn't convinced. "But when I called the camp director—" "You called the camp?" Robert frowned. "Why?" "I wanted to check if anything unusual happened there." "And do you know what the director said?" "That Michael left a week ago because he told them his grandmother had died. My mother was perfectly healthy and full of energy." Robert tensed noticeably. "And what do you think?" "I don't know what to think." The panic I had been holding back all day finally broke through. It's insane. Maybe someone made him say that, or maybe that isn't Michael. Robert took my hands. "Emma, listen to yourself." "Of course it's Michael. Who else could it be?" "I'll talk to him again tomorrow," I answered. Reluctantly, my husband agreed, and we ended the conversation and went to bed. That night, I had a nightmare. One of those dreams so terrifyingly real that you wake with your heart pounding and cold sweat on your skin. I was standing at the edge of a cliff. Tall pines surrounded me, and below, about 15 meters down, a mountain stream rushed over jagged rocks. The air was crisp and fresh, smelling of pine and damp earth. It would have been beautiful if not for the crushing sense of impending disaster in my chest. "Mom!" Michael's voice called from the side, and I turned. He was standing right at the edge, just centimeters from the drop, smiling. But something was wrong with his smile. It looked strained, unnatural, as though painted on. "Michael, step back from the edge," I cried, reaching out my hand to him. "It's okay, Mom," he replied, but didn't move. "I just want to show you something." "What?" I asked, taking a cautious step closer. "This," he pointed down at the stream and the sharp rocks. I looked down and suddenly saw something that froze the blood in my veins. On one of the rocks lay the body of a teenage boy. I couldn't make out his face from the distance, but somehow I knew it was Michael. My son lay below, broken, motionless, and in that instant, I woke up, gasping, trembling, with a scream stuck in my throat. The bedroom was dark, only moonlight filtering through the blinds. Beside me, Robert breathed steadily, undisturbed by my abrupt awakening. I stared at the ceiling, trying to calm my breath and convince myself it had only been a dream, but the dream had been so vivid, so real. The next day, I called Michael into the kitchen and asked him to sit down. He looked tired, with dark shadows under his eyes, as though he hadn't slept all night. "Michael, we need to talk," I began, trying to keep my voice calm and gentle. "I know something happened at camp." "Something you don't want to tell me about? But I'm your mother, and I want to help. Please tell me the truth." He stared at his hands for a long time, nervously drumming his fingers on the table. When he finally raised his eyes, there was such deep sadness in them. And was it fear? Shame? That my heart clenched. But Michael said nothing. I felt fear rising inside me. "Michael, if someone is threatening you, we can go to the police. We can protect you." He gave a bitter smile. an adult, weary smile I had never seen on his face before. "It's not that, Mom. It's just, some secrets should stay secrets." Secrets? What kind of secrets can a 13-year-old boy keep from his own mother? My patience was starting to fray. Michael is left-handed. He hates broccoli. He would never call rock music childish. And he would never, ever let his little sister cry. I said, quietly but firmly, "Who are you? And where is my real son?" The boy grew even paler, his lips trembling. For a moment, I thought he was about to confess everything, but instead, he suddenly pushed back his chair and stood up. You're crazy, Mom," he said, his voice frightened and unconvincing. "I don't know what you're talking about." With that, he ran out of the kitchen. I heard his footsteps rush up the stairs and the slam of his bedroom door. Seconds later, muffled sobs came from behind it. I sat in the kitchen, feeling empty and terrified. That evening, we gathered for dinner. Robert, Michael, and me. An ordinary family dinner, like so many we'd had before. Robert talked about a problem at work. Michael pushed his food around in silence, and I tried to keep the conversation alive, though my mind was far away. Suddenly, my phone rang. The number was unknown. "Excuse me," I said. "I'll take this." I answered the call and brought the phone to my ear. "Hello? Mom?" a voice said, and my knees nearly gave out. "Mom, it's me, Michael." I turned and looked at the table, where my son was still sitting, fork in hand, watching me with faint concern. His phone lay beside him. "What?" I breathed, the room spinning around me. "Mom, I'm in the hospital," the voice continued, "at Greenwood County Hospital. Please come." Who is this?" I managed to force out. "It's me, Michael, your son," the voice said, tinged with impatience and fear. "Please, Mom." I felt something cold tighten around my heart. That voice, it was so much like Michael's. I'll come soon," I said. "Wait for me." I hung up and turned back to the table. Robert and Michael were both staring at me with concern. "Who was that?" Robert asked. I looked at my son, at his familiar, suddenly foreign face, and something inside me finally cracked. "It was a colleague from work," I lied. "There's a problem with a project. I need to go to the office right away." "Now?" Robert frowned. "It's almost 9 o'clock. "The deadline is tomorrow." I tried to sound steady, though a storm raged inside me. "I'll be back as soon as I can." I grabbed my bag and car keys, avoiding Michael's eyes. Something in his expression had changed. There was suspicion there now, and maybe fear. Leaving the house, I started the car and headed toward Greenwood County Hospital, 40 minutes away. The whole drive, my mind raced, desperately searching for a rational explanation. Could this be a cruel prank? Someone Michael knew trying to joke with me? Or no. I wouldn't allow myself to consider the possibility that the boy living in my house these past days wasn't my son. When I arrived at the hospital, it was nearly 10 p.m. I went to the reception desk and, trying to keep my voice calm, asked, "Excuse me, I'm looking for a patient named Michael Foster. I got a call saying he's here." The nurse checked the computer. "Yes, Michael Foster is in room 304, third floor. Are you family?" "I'm his mother," I replied, the words catching in my throat. "Great. You can go up to see him." I thanked her and headed for the elevator. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it would burst out of my chest. I didn't know whom or what I expected to find in room 304. When I stepped out of the elevator on the third floor, I walked slowly down the corridor, searching for the right door. Finally, I found it, and taking a deep breath, knocked. "Come in," a weak voice answered from inside. I opened the door and went in. The ward was small, with a single bed by the window. A boy lay on the bed, pale, with bandages around his head and his arm in a cast. When he turned his head and saw me, his eyes widened and a faint smile appeared on his face. "Mom," he whispered. I froze in the doorway, unable to take a single step forward, because the boy on the bed was Michael. My Michael, with that same look I had known his whole life. "Michael?" My voice trembled. Is that really you?" He nodded and tears glittered in his eyes. "Yes, Mom, it's me." I went to the bedside, still not quite believing my eyes. Cautiously, afraid he might vanish, I reached out and touched his cheek. It was warm and real. "What happened, Michael?" I whispered. "Why are you in the hospital? Who is that boy who's been living in our house? Why does he look exactly like you?" Michael drew a deep breath, as if gathering strength for a long story. "George," Michael croaked. "George lives in our house." "Who is George?" I asked, my eyes filling with tears. "My own twin brother. You and Dad lied to me all this time. I'm not your son." I sank into the chair beside the bed, feeling the floor drop away beneath me. A twin? But Michael had no twin. He couldn't. "What are you talking about?" I whispered. "You don't have a brother." Michael gave a faint smile. "I thought so too, until this summer, until I met George at camp. Forgive us. Your father and I didn't want to tell you you weren't our biological son. We took you as a baby from an orphanage, but they told us you didn't have a brother. At least that's what we were told." My son stared at me intently. His eyes were red. "We were planning to tell you when you were older. All the parenting books say not to hide an adoption forever, but to tell when the child is old enough to understand. We planned to tell you at 16. Tears ran down my cheeks. "Forgive us, Michael. We should have told you sooner." "And Sophie?" he asked. "She's our biological daughter." We tried for a long time to conceive. Doctors said we had almost no chance, so we decided to adopt. And then, 6 years after you came into our family, a small miracle happened. I became pregnant with Sophie. "A classic story," Michael snorted. "Infertile couple adopts a child and then suddenly gets pregnant." Like in the movies, there was no bitterness in his voice, rather a thoughtful tone. He set aside a photograph and picked up a sandwich. "Have you ever tried to find my real parents?" he asked, taking a bite. "Biological parents," I corrected softly. "We are your real parents, Michael." "But yes, we tried. Social services found no trace. You just appeared out of nowhere, wrapped in a blue blanket with the letter M embroidered on it. That's why they gave you a name starting with that letter, Michael." Michael adjusted his pillow, trying to sit up a little, and I helped him get comfortable. Then he began to tell what had happened. "On the first day at camp, I met a boy who looked exactly like me. Can you imagine? Like looking in a mirror. Everyone was shocked. The counselors thought it was a prank, that we just looked alike. But we really were identical. His name is George Clark. We started talking. We started coming up with theories. Maybe we were relatives? Distant cousins? But then we found something else. We both have a scar on our right ankle, identical, like from surgery. I always thought it was a birthmark, but George said his mother mentioned some operation when he was very small. And then we realized that you're twins," I finished for him, the room spinning. "Separated at birth." Michael nodded. "We weren't sure, but it seemed like the only explanation. We decided to find out the truth. George was as stunned as I was. He always thought he was an only child." I closed my eyes, trying to process it all. 2 children, separated at birth, randomly finding each other at summer camp. It sounded like a movie plot. "George and I became friends," Michael continued. "We spent all our free time together. Other kids looked at us like we were a natural wonder. Some were even afraid, like we were aliens. But it only brought us closer." He smiled sadly, remembering. "George told me about his life. A single mother barely making ends meet. They live in a tiny apartment in a rough neighborhood. His mother works 2 jobs and is rarely home, and when she is, she often comes home drunk and takes it out on him. He showed me bruises, Mom. He said his mother hates him, says he's a mistake, that it would be better if he'd never been born. I felt my heart clench at his story. Poor child. And then I told him about my life, Michael continued, about our house, about how you and Dad always support me, about Sophie, about our family trips, about my room with the game console and the guitar. He hesitated. It was hard for him to hear all that. Not because he was jealous, but because it showed him just how different our lives had been, even though we're identical. I nodded with understanding. For George, it must have been a painful revelation to realize what his life might have been if his mother had made a different choice. One day we wandered far into the woods, way beyond the camp's borders, Michael went on. We reached a big stream. There was a steep cliff, and we sat on the edge, swinging our legs over the water. We talked about life, about what we'd do after camp. I said I couldn't wait to get back home, to my video games and band practice. But George, he suddenly got very sad. He said he had nothing to look forward to at home, that his mom probably didn't even notice he was gone. Michael fell silent for a moment, searching for words. We started arguing. I don't even know how it began. I told him he should appreciate his mother no matter what, that she was doing her best. He got angry, said I didn't understand anything, that it was easy to talk about hardship when you had everything. The conversation got tense. He paused, staring out the window. George stood up to leave. I got up too, wanting to stop him, to apologize. I grabbed his arm. We were both standing right at the edge of the cliff. And then, Michael took a deep breath. It all happened so fast. He jerked away, trying to pull free. I lost my balance, and he instinctively pushed me. And I fell. He pushed you? I asked, a wave of anger rising inside me. No, Mom, not on purpose, Michael said quickly. It was an accident. We were both too close to the edge, both worked up. He didn't mean to push me. I saw his face in that moment. He was terrified. I covered my mouth with my hand to stifle a scream. I remember falling, hitting the rocks, and then everything went black. I woke up here, in the hospital. Michael looked at me with pain in his eyes. The doctor said some tourist found me. I had no ID with me. George must have panicked and taken my phone and wallet before running away. But how did he know our address? I asked, still trying to process it all. I told him everything about our life, Mom, Michael answered with a sad smile. Our address, the names of my teachers and friends. I was so proud of my life that I shared every detail. It wasn't hard for him to pretend to be me. We even mimicked each other's voices for fun. But he didn't know everything. The small things, that you're left-handed, that you hate broccoli, that you never listen to classical music, I added. Oh, Michael. I hugged him again, careful not to touch his injured arm. I'm so sorry. Michael gave a faint smile. He couldn't know all the details. We look alike, but we're different people with different lives. I need to call your father, I said, pulling out my phone. Tell him everything in dash. No. Michael grabbed my hand with surprising strength. Please don't. Not yet. I don't want you to call the police or anything. George. He didn't mean to kill me. It was an accident. And he probably thinks I'm dead. I was stunned by his calmness. Michael, but he took your place. He fooled us. Pretended to be you. Because he had nowhere else to go, Mom, Michael said softly. I can't blame him. If our roles had been reversed, if I had grown up with his mother and he with you, who knows what I would have done in his place? So what do we do? I asked, panic rising in my chest. I don't know, Michael admitted, but first we need to find out the truth. You You really didn't know I had a twin brother? I shook my head. No, Michael. The mystery of twins separated at birth felt like the plot of a melodrama, not my real life. Soon, Dr. Rivera came into the room, a short man with keen eyes and a reassuring smile. "How's our patient today?" he asked, flipping through Michael's chart. Michael propped himself up on his elbows. "I'm fine, doctor." My head barely hurts now, and my arm, well, it's manageable. The doctor nodded, checked Michael's pupils, and examined the bandage on his head. "Looks good. The concussion is mild. The wrist fracture will heal in a few weeks. You're lucky, young man. That fall could have ended much worse." "So I can go home?" Michael asked hopefully. Dr. Rivera frowned. "Please," Michael said. "I really do feel fine. And Mom needs to get back to my sister. She's home alone." "Mrs. Foster," the doctor turned to me, "if you take your son home, you'll need to watch him very closely. Any signs of worsening, headache, nausea, confusion, and you come back immediately. Understood?" "Of course, doctor." "I'll be very careful," I promised. He hesitated, then sighed. "In that case, I'll prepare the discharge papers. A nurse will bring them for you to sign. Michael needs rest. No physical activity for at least 2 weeks. I'll prescribe some pain medication and schedule a follow-up appointment." When the doctor left, Michael exhaled with relief. "Thank you, Mom." "For what?" "For not arguing. I need to get home as soon as possible." I squeezed his good hand. "We'll figure this out. I promise." An hour later, the nurse brought in the documents, a thick stack of papers requiring my signature. Insurance forms, consent forms, home care instructions, prescriptions. I signed them mechanically, barely reading, my mind focused only on what awaited us at home. "What about payment?" I asked once I was done. The nurse smiled. "Everything's already processed through your insurance. You'll get a bill later for anything not covered by the policy." But another question kept gnawing at me. "Tell me, has the police asked about Michael's case?" "The report says it was an accident, but—" "Not that I know of," the nurse replied. "When he was brought in, he was unconscious, with no documents. We registered him as John Doe until he woke up and gave his name. Your son was very insistent that it was his own fault. He said he climbed too high on the rocks, slipped, and fell." I cast a quick glance at Michael. He was sitting on the edge of the bed. "That's all." The nurse handed me a copy of the discharge. "You're free to go." By the time we pulled up to the house, it was completely dark. The street was empty and silent. "Ready?" I asked Michael, turning off the engine. He took a deep breath and nodded. "Ready." When we reached the house, I noticed the living room light was still on, even though it was past midnight. Robert must have been waiting for me, worried about my long absence. I helped Michael out of the car. He was weak, but firmly refused my support as we approached the door. "I can do it myself," he whispered. "I don't want to look helpless." I nodded, respecting his wish, though I stayed close, ready to catch him if he faltered. Sliding the key into the lock, I hesitated, gathering my thoughts. "It'll be fine," Michael whispered, noticing my hesitation. And I was struck. It was my son comforting me, when it should have been the other way around. I turned the key and opened the door. Robert was sitting in an armchair in the living room, staring tensely at his phone. On the couch, knees pulled to his chest, sat Michael. George, as I now knew. He lifted his head at the sound of the door, and his eyes widened in horror when he saw us. "Emma, finally!" Robert jumped from the chair. "I've been trying to reach you, but—" His gaze fell on Michael beside me. His eyes darted to the couch and back, his face paling. "What? Who—" But George was already on his feet. He stared at Michael as though seeing a ghost. "You," he whispered. "You're alive." And then, to my shock, he dropped to his knees, bowing his head. "I'm sorry." The words tore out of him through suppressed sobs. "I thought you were dead." I saw you fall, hit your head on the rock. There was blood. So much blood. I checked your pulse, but I didn't feel anything. I panicked and ran. I swear I didn't mean to push you." Robert watched the scene in total bewilderment. "Emma, what is going on? Who is this boy? Why are they—" "It's a long story, Rob," I said, helping Michael into an armchair. "Let's all calm down first." George was still kneeling, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "You can punish me however you want," he said without lifting his eyes. "My mother, she would have beaten me with a belt for this, or locked me in the closet for days. I deserve whatever punishment you give me." Michael looked at me, his eyes pleading silently. I understood at once and walked over to George. "Stand up," I said gently, laying a hand on his shoulder. "No one will beat you or lock you up. That's not how problems are solved in this family." George lifted his tear-streaked face to me, disbelief in his eyes. "But I nearly killed him. I stole his life. I lied to you. And we will talk about all of that, seriously," I nodded. "But first, I want to hear the whole story. From the beginning." We all settled in the living room. Robert, still stunned, sat in the armchair opposite Michael. George perched on the very edge of the couch, as though ready to bolt at any second. I brought tea for everyone and sat beside Michael, steadying him by the shoulders. George began his story, his voice trembling. "I never knew I had a brother," he said, stealing glances at Michael. "My mom never told me. She hardly ever talked to me at all unless she was yelling. When I saw Michael at camp, it was like a miracle. Like looking in a mirror, only the reflection was smiling when I wasn't." He told us how he and Michael spent every free minute together, sharing stories from their completely different lives. "He told me about you, about family dinners, trips to the sea, how you always support him even when he makes mistakes," George said quietly, staring at the floor. "At first, I didn't believe him. I thought he was exaggerating, trying to brag. Families like that only exist in movies, not in real life." He described his life with his mother, a tiny apartment with a roof that always leaked, noisy neighbors constantly shouting at each other, a mother who came home drunk and took out her bad moods on him. Sometimes she forgot to buy groceries, and I'd eat nothing but dry cereal for days, if any was left, he went on. And when I asked for money for lunch at school, she said I cost her too much already. Then George told us about that fateful day by the stream, almost the same story Michael had told me in the hospital. "I didn't mean to push him," his voice broke. "It happened by accident. We were both worked up, shouting at each other. I just wanted to leave and he grabbed my arm." George took a deep breath before continuing. "When he fell, I screamed his name. Then I climbed down to him. There was a pool of blood around his head. I tried to find a pulse, but my hands were shaking so badly. I was sure he was dead, and I panicked." "You took his phone and wallet," Robert said quietly, "and decided to take his place." George nodded, still not looking up. "I didn't plan it. It's just, when I realized what happened, I knew they'd blame me for killing him. They'd send me to jail, or worse, back to my mother. And then I remembered everything Michael had told me about his home, about you. And I thought maybe I could just become him, at least for a while." "You told the counselors your parents had picked you up?" I asked. "Yes, they didn't even check. I just showed them a message from Michael's phone, supposedly from you. The young counselors believed it." Michael, who had been silent until then, suddenly asked, "How did you get here?" "By bus," George replied. "You had a return ticket voucher in your backpack, remember? And I knew your address by heart. You talked about it so much." "And then you just pretended to be me," Michael concluded, not accusing, just stating a fact. George lowered his head even further. "I tried. I really tried. But there were so many things I didn't know. That you're left-handed, that you hate broccoli, that you listen to that loud music. He gave a faint smile. I thought your mom figured it out the very first day. She looked at me like she could see right through me. Because a mother always knows her child, I said softly, even if they look like 2 drops of water. You know what was the strangest thing? George said suddenly, a note of nostalgia in his voice. Living a normal life. Just normal. Where no one yells, no one hits, no one says they wish you'd never been born. He looked around the room as if seeing our living room for the first time. Here there's always food in the fridge. It's always clean, warm. No one comes home drunk at 3 a.m. No one wakes you up screaming. No one throws your things out the window because you're too noisy. I noticed Robert gripping the armrests so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Michael looked at his double with an expression of both pain and compassion. And there are toys here, George went on with childlike wonder. A real game console. I never even had a toy car. Mom said toys were a waste of money. I made my own out of cardboard and string. He looked at Michael with a shy smile. I'm sorry for wearing your clothes. They were so new, not patched up 100 times, and they smelled like fabric softener, not cigarette smoke. And your room, he shook his head, it's bigger than our whole apartment. And the bed, with a real mattress, not a folding cot with a sagging middle. The first 3 nights I couldn't even sleep. It was too soft and too quiet. George kept talking, describing simple, ordinary things that to him seemed like incredible luxuries. A hot shower with clean towels, 3 meals a day, the ability to sit and read a book without fear his mother would barge in during another fit of rage. And Sophie, his voice faltered, I never thought little kids could be so kind. She showed me her drawings, wanted to play with me. I didn't know what to do. I was afraid of hurting her, so I just avoided her. He looked at me apologetically. I'm sorry about that. I didn't want to upset Sophie. I just didn't know how to be a big brother. The most amazing thing is you, he said, shifting his gaze between Robert and me. You ask how my day was. You care about my opinion. You say please and thank you. You hug for no reason, just because. George fell silent, lowering his head. When he finally spoke again, his voice was barely audible. I know I have to go back to my mother. I know I deserve punishment for everything I did, but these past few days have been the happiest of my life. A heavy silence fell. I looked at Robert, seeking support. His face was grim, but in his eyes I saw not anger, but compassion. Then I turned to Michael. He sat quietly, gazing at his twin with deep thought. Mom, Michael finally said, we have to take George back to his mother. We need to sort this out. I nodded, agreeing with his words, though inside I resisted the thought of returning this child to the terrible situation he had described. Robert nodded too, though I could see the same doubts tormenting him. George lifted his frightened eyes to us. Please don't. She'll be furious. She's probably already noticed I'm gone and has thought up a special punishment for me. We have to, George, I said gently. We can't just keep you here, no matter how much I want to. Your mother is your legal guardian. If we don't take you back, we could be accused of kidnapping. And we want to hear her side of the story, Robert added, how it happened that you and Michael were separated. Why she never told you about a twin brother. Michael suddenly stood up from the couch and walked over to George. He held out his uninjured hand. I'll go with you. We'll face your mother together. George stared at the offered hand in disbelief. Why? After everything I did? Because you're my brother, Michael said simply, and I won't let you be alone again. The next morning, we all went to the address George had given us. It was a run-down apartment block in a rough neighborhood on the edge of town. The windows on the first floor were boarded up, the entryway smelled of damp and cats, and the elevator was out of order. "Fifth floor, apartment 512, George said quietly as we began climbing the narrow staircase with peeling walls. Michael, despite his injuries, insisted on walking on his own. He moved slowly but steadily, pausing now and then to catch his breath. George stayed close beside him, ready to support him if needed. When we reached the right floor, George stopped in front of a battered door marked 512. His raised hand shook as he prepared to knock. "I can't," he whispered. "We're here with you," Robert said, placing a hand on his shoulder. George drew a deep breath and knocked. At first, there was no sound from inside. Then we heard uneven footsteps, a loud "damn it," and the crash of breaking glass. Finally, the door was yanked open. A woman of about 35 stood on the threshold, though she looked much older. Long, unkempt dark hair, deep circles under her eyes, sickly, pale skin. She wore a wrinkled t-shirt and faded jeans. A cigarette smoldered in her hand, dropping ash onto the filthy floor. "So you finally showed up," she spat, spotting George. Her eyes were glassy, her speech slightly slurred. She was clearly drunk despite the early hour. "Where the hell have you been for 2 weeks? I was starting to think I'd gotten rid of you for good." Then she noticed us, and her gaze landed on Michael. The cigarette slipped from her fingers, her mouth dropping open in shock. "What the—" She blinked several times, looking from one boy to the other. "What the hell is this?" "Mrs. Clark?" Robert asked politely. "Could we come in and talk?" The woman narrowed her eyes, examining us suspiciously. "Who are you?" "My name is Robert Foster. This is my wife, Emma. And this is our son, Michael," Robert replied evenly. "We have some questions about George." The woman's face drained of color, if that were possible. She glanced at Michael, then back at George, and finally stepped away from the door. "Come in," she muttered. "Just don't expect the place to be clean." That was the understatement of the year. The apartment was a single room with a tiny kitchen separated by a breakfast bar. The only window was covered with a tattered sheet. Empty bottles, cigarette butts, and dirty laundry littered the floor. In the corner stood a narrow bed with a sagging mattress, the same folding cot George had mentioned. Next to it was a box of belongings, apparently serving as his closet. The air was stale, heavy with the smell of tobacco, alcohol, and unwashed clothes. I saw Michael instinctively raise a hand to his nose, then quickly lower it when he caught George's guilty glance. George's mother dropped onto the only chair and lit a fresh cigarette. "So, what do you want?" she asked, blowing smoke toward us. "We'd like to know why you never told George about his twin brother," Robert asked directly. The woman took another drag, staring hard at Michael. "So that's where you ended up," she muttered, as if to herself. "In a nice little family. Lucky you." "Mrs. Clark," Robert repeated firmly. "Can you explain what happened?" She gave a short, sharp laugh. "What happened?" she echoed. "Life happened, that's what. I got knocked up by some guy who swore he loved me forever and then bolted the second he found out I was having twins. I didn't sign up for 2, she mimicked in a mocking tone. I was left alone, no money, no job, with 2 screaming babies. Do you have any idea how much diapers for 2 cost? Formula? Doctors?" She stubbed out the cigarette on the edge of the table, leaving a black mark. "I couldn't feed 2. I could barely manage one. So I took the other to an orphanage, wrapped in a blue blanket my mother had knitted." She nodded toward Michael. "I guess that was you." "Congratulations. You got the better end of the deal." "But why did you never tell George?" I asked, struggling to contain the anger boiling inside me. He had a right to know he had a brother. "And what difference would it have made?" she snapped. "It would only have made him suffer more, knowing he had a twin brother out there living a better life. Do you know how hard it is to raise a child alone, especially when you're still a child yourself?" "But why me?" Michael pressed. "Why not George? Or Why not both? It was a cruel question, but I understood his need to know. Why, out of two identical babies, had she chosen one and abandoned the other? Honestly, she gave a bitter laugh, I flipped a coin. Seriously, you were completely identical. I couldn't decide, so I just flipped a coin. Heads, I keep the first. Tails, the second. It landed on tails. I felt a wave of fury wash over me. The fate of my son, of our whole family, decided on the whim of a tossed coin. It was so absurd, so cruel, that I could barely hold myself back from telling this woman exactly what I thought of her. I noticed George pressed against the wall, as if trying to make himself invisible. Michael, on the other hand, straightened, staring at the woman who was technically his biological mother with cold detachment. "So what do you want now?" Mrs. Clark asked. "Money? I don't have any. An apology? Fine, I'm sorry I couldn't raise both kids in luxury. Take George?" She waved her hand dismissively. "Go ahead, take him if you want. All he does is drain money from me." At those words, George flinched as if struck. Robert placed a protective hand on his shoulder. "We came here to learn the truth," Robert said firmly, "and now we know it." We left the apartment in heavy silence. George walked with his head bowed, Michael beside him. Robert gripped my hand tightly, and I could feel him trembling with restrained anger. Only when we were back in the car did I manage to speak. "George, I'm so sorry. We can't just take you. There are laws." "I understand," he replied quietly. "Thank you for," he faltered, then added, "for at least letting me feel, for a few days, what it's like to have a real family." We left him at the entrance. George tried to smile, but his lips trembled. "Goodbye, Michael," he said, holding out his hand. "I'm sorry for how it all turned out." But Michael didn't shake his hand. Instead, he pulled his brother into a tight hug with his good arm. "This isn't goodbye," he said firmly. "I'll find a way to see you." We drove off, leaving George standing by the building. In the rearview mirror, I saw him watching our car until he grew smaller and smaller, then disappeared from sight. The following week passed in an attempt to return to normal life. Michael recovered from his injury. Sophie was overjoyed that her real brother was back. Robert buried himself in work. But I couldn't stop thinking about George, the boy with Michael's eyes and a soul full of pain. Robert and I talked long into the night, every night, about possible options. Could we legally take George? What were our chances of getting custody? What would Michael say if we decided to fight for his brother? As it turned out, Michael had already made the decision for us. On Saturday evening, exactly a week after our visit to Mrs. Clark, a storm broke out. Robert and I sat in the living room, listening to the rain pounding on the roof. Michael was in his room, supposedly doing homework. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. Robert and I exchanged a glance. Who could come in weather like this? Robert opened the door, and there was George. He was drenched through, a backpack on his shoulders, shivering from the cold. His left eye was blackened, a fresh bruise on his cheek. I didn't know where else to go," he whispered. I rushed to him, pulling him inside, stripping off his wet jacket. "What happened?" "Who hit you?" "Mom," he answered without looking up. "She found out I'd been calling Michael. We talked every day, you know. He gave me his new number. When she found the note with it..." At that moment, Michael appeared on the stairs. He looked at George, and his face twisted with anger at the sight of the bruises. "You came," he said, coming down. "I was waiting for you." "You were waiting?" George repeated. Michael nodded. "I knew you would come. Sooner or later, I prepared a place for you." He pointed upstairs, and suddenly I realized the noises I'd been hearing these past days were Michael moving furniture in his room, clearing space for a second bed. "You can't go back there," Michael said firmly, looking at his brother, "and I won't let you leave." "Mom, Dad," he turned to us, "we have to do something. She hits him. I know we can't just take him, but there has to be some legal way. I looked at Robert and saw in his eyes the same resolve that had already formed in my heart. There is a way, Robert said. We'll go to Child Protective Services. Report the abuse. With bruises like that, we'll have proof. And we'll apply for temporary custody, I added. Then we'll file for adoption. As his biological aunt and uncle, we have priority. You really want this? George asked in disbelief. Of course we do, Michael said, putting an arm around his brother's shoulders. You're part of our family. You always were, we just didn't know it. George broke down in tears, not the quiet, restrained sobs from before, but loud, cleansing sobs of someone who had finally found his home. The following months were filled with court hearings, visits from social workers, endless paperwork. Neighbors confirmed that they often heard yelling and crying from Mrs. Clark's apartment. George's teachers spoke of the bruises they had noticed, of how the boy sometimes came to school hungry. Mrs. Clark herself didn't even try to fight. She easily gave up her parental rights in exchange for a small financial compensation. Just before Christmas, we received official approval to adopt George. It was the happiest day of our lives, the day our family finally became whole. Michael and George shared a room, but that only seemed to strengthen their bond. They were like two halves of one whole, different yet complementing each other. Michael taught George to play guitar and ride a skateboard. George helped Michael with math and taught him chess, a game he had mastered in the library where he spent hours to avoid going home. Sophie adored her two older brothers. She made them play dolls with her, drew their portraits where they were always holding hands. George gradually changed. His eyes, once filled with fear and mistrust, now shone with joy. He began to smile, at first rarely and hesitantly, then more and more often. He joined a sports team, signed up for the chess club, and made friends. Every day he discovered small joys he had been deprived of his whole life. Sometimes, looking at the two boys, so alike in appearance, yet so different in character, I thought about the strange turns of fate that had brought them back together, about the chance meeting at summer camp, about the fall from the cliff. Everything could have gone so differently. Michael could have been badly injured. George might never have found his way to us. I might not have noticed the little inconsistencies that gave the switch away. But it had all turned out exactly as it was meant to. Our family had gained a new member, a boy who was always meant to be part of it. A year later, when we celebrated the first anniversary of George's adoption, I asked Michael if he regretted having to share his room, his parents' attention, his friends. Michael looked at me in surprise. Mom, I gained a brother. My real twin brother. How could I ever regret that? He smiled, glancing at George, who was helping Sophie decorate cookies with icing in the kitchen. You know, sometimes I think I should thank fate for that fall. Without it, we would never have learned the truth. George would still be living in that horrible apartment, and I would never have known I had a brother who needed help. I hugged my son, my heart overflowing with pride for him, for his capacity to forgive, for his maturity, for his boundless love. I'm proud of you, Michael, I whispered. You brought home the part of our family that was always meant to be with us. From the kitchen came an eruption of laughter. George must have said something funny, and Sophie was giggling uncontrollably, her bright, childish laughter filling the house. Hear that? Michael asked with a smile. That's what a complete family sounds like. And I couldn't help but agree with him. That was exactly how it sounded. A complete happy family, finally reunited after a long separation. If you enjoyed this story, please support it with a like, a comment, or a subscription. Thank you.